With summer in full swing, you may feel the need to refresh your closet, but you don't want to waste any money on pieces you'll only wear once or for just one season. Then that's where Quince comes in. Their clothes are timeless, feel luxurious, look elevated, and the quality is way beyond what you'd expect for the price. It's the kind of wardrobe upgrade that just clicks. Think 100% European linen tops starting at $30, washable silk dresses and skirts, and soft cotton sweaters. Versatile warm weather pieces you'll reach for again and again. And the best part with everything with Quince is half the cost of similar brands. By working directly with top artisans and cutting out the middleman, Quince gives you luxury without the markup. Summer for me also means conferences. I'm still taking those Traveler 5 pocket pants along with me, which look good and feel good. But it also means lounging, and that's what that linen shirt is for. Give your summer closet an upgrade with Quince. Go to quince.com/traveler for free shipping on your order and 365-day returns. That's QUINCE.com/traveler to get free shipping and 365-day returns. Quince.com/traveler. And thanks to Quince for sponsoring this episode of Amateur Traveler.
Thanks for selling your car to Carvana. Here's your check.
Whoa, when did I get here?
What do you mean?
I swear it was just moments ago that I accepted a great offer from Carvana online. I must have time traveled to the future.
It was just moments ago. We do same-day pickup. Here's your check for that great offer.
It is the future.
It's the present and just the convenience of Carvana. Sorry to blow your mind.
It's all good. Happens all the time.
Sell your car the convenient way to
Carvana.
Pickup times may vary and fees may apply.
Amateur Traveler, episode 952. Today, Amateur Traveler talks about beaches and blowholes, waterfalls and fallets, giant clams, and Robert Louis Stevenson as we go to Samoa. This is Chris Christensen from Amateur Traveler. Let's talk about Samoa. I'd like to welcome back to Amateur Traveler Jonty Crane from JontyTravels.com, who's come to talk to us this time about Samoa. Jonty, welcome back to the show. It feels like you were here moments ago.
With some great walks in New Zealand and Auckland and Timor-Leste. Yeah, I get around a little bit.
Excellent. What's your connection with Samoa?
So I've just spent nearly a month exploring Samoa. So I spent a week in Apia, which is the capital, and then 2.5 weeks cycling around both of the main islands. And I also visited the third largest island, which is tiny. So I've seen most of Samoa, so I feel reasonably qualified to talk to you about it today.
Excellent. And why should someone go to Samoa?
So it has beautiful beaches. So Samoa, just for reference, is a small island in the Pacific.
Right.
So if you imagine a tropical Pacific paradise, then something like Samoa would probably spring to mind in terms of palm trees along a beautiful sandy beach with snorkeling opportunities and some diving opportunities. In Samoa, there's a lot of refreshing freshwater pools as well as saltwater. Often by the sea, they've got these freshwater pools, which are great for relaxing in. The Samoan culture is very interesting. It's very much the heart of Polynesia, and they've done a very good job at maintaining their culture. You can stay in fallets, which I'll talk a bit about later, which is quite a unique kind of Samoan accommodation option. And one of the things I really like about Samoa is there's enough tourism infrastructure there that you can get around and do the things you want to do, but there's not hordes of tourists. So it's in that kind of sweet spot. Places like Fiji and Hawaii can be pretty busy. Places like Timor-Leste, where I've been, has very little infrastructure for tourism. So this is a happy medium.
Excellent. What itinerary are you going to recommend for us?
So a 1-week itinerary, although as I was there a bit longer, you probably can do all this in a week, but probably 10 days might be better. Okay. So I'd suggest that you spend a day or two in Apia, the capital, and then 1 to 3 days on Upolu, which is the second largest island, but it's where 75% of the population live. And then 2 or 3 days on Savaii, which is the larger island where not so many people live. And then maybe do a 1-day optional trip out to Manaono, which is a small island between those two other islands.
Excellent. Shall we start with Apia?
Actually, I might just give a little bit of context to Samoa first, if that's fine enough. Okay, so a bit of brief history about Samoa. So the Samoan Islands were settled about 3,500 years ago. They've got strong links with Fiji and Tonga, and they're probably halfway between New Zealand and Hawaii. So they're pretty slap bang in the middle of the Pacific, very close to the international dateline. Europeans first arrived in the 18th century, and there was quite a lot of competition between the Americans the Brits and the Germans in the Pacific, as you do. So much so that in 1889, they had ships from all three of those countries in the harbour, and there was a massive storm coming, and none of them wanted to chicken out. Nobody wanted to be the country that left the harbour first. And so they all stayed put and their ships got destroyed, and it was a big mess, but nobody was going to leave. It was quite a strategically important location. Then 1898, the islands were partitioned. So what I'm talking about today, tradition was then German Samoa, and then it was called West Samoa, and now it is just called Samoa. And then the much smaller islands to the east, about 65k to the east, I believe, is American Samoa. Mm-hmm. And so the Germans got that, the Americans got the other part, and then the British got the German parts of the Solomon Islands. So they did a bit of a divide up of those places. New Zealand took over German Samoa in 1914, and it became an independent country in 1962. That's quite interesting. Not many people have been to Samoa, but probably lots of people have met Samoans. So it's one of those countries in which it's a very good exporter of people. So there's about 600,000 Samoans in the world. About a third of them live in Samoa. About a third of them live in New Zealand. And then there's another 100,000 in Australia and another 110,000 in America. So there's quite a large diaspora of Samoans around the world. I mentioned 3 islands earlier. There's 4 islands that people live on, although the one I didn't visit only has about 100 people on it. But there are 10 islands in total around Samoa. So there are some uninhabited islands, particularly off the east coast, which you can visit. And in terms of religion, that is quite important in Samoa. At the last census, there were only 132 atheists in the whole country. Huh. So almost everybody is Christian, but they're of many different denominations. So you've got Roman Catholics, you've got Mormons, there's Methodists, the Assemblies of God, Seventh-day Adventists. So every village has 6 churches because they're all competing against each other to see who they can get in their congregation. So that's quite significant in terms of Samoan culture as the strength of religion. And you will see that when you travel around the islands, the number of churches. So that's a little bit of background about Samoa. And then, we'll start with Apollo, which is the small of the 2 main islands, but is where most people live. And that's where the international airport lies. And what I'm going to talk about in this itinerary is I'm going to describe the sites in the order that I saw them, because I got on the bicycle and I rode all the way around the island. So each of the islands have got basically one road that goes around the island. So navigation is quite straightforward. So each of the islands I cycled around in an anti-clockwise direction. So starting from Apia on Apollo, if between there and the airport, that is where there's lots of churches everywhere, but those have probably got some of the largest and most impressive churches. So it's quite an interesting kind of introduction to when you arrive to Samoa and you go from the airport to Apia, you'll see a bit of a taster of that kind of Samoan culture. Heading around the island, there's a place called River Walk where you can hire a local guide and you can go it's billed as a walk, but it's more of a wade. Like at certain points, you might be up to your stomach or up to or even your chest, depending how tall you are in water. But you wade out through the river and you get to a beautiful waterfall. And it's a very cool and refreshing kind of activity to do. A bit further around is one of the most popular sites in Samoa. I think it was the only place where I saw double-digit numbers of tourists. It's quite low tourist numbers. I went in May 2025. The busiest time is more in the school holidays around July. So it can get busier, but even in the main tourist season, it was relatively quiet. So this site is the Giant Clam Sanctuary. And as the name suggests, it's a marine sanctuary home to giant clams. And they're quite impressive. If you've never seen a giant clam before, the largest of them, and there's probably about a dozen or 15 of the largest species, are about 1 meter long. And they're only a couple of meters down, so they're very easy to see snorkeling, and there's lots of smaller clams around there. It's a bit odd because there's not a lot there apart from all these amazing clams. There's a little bit of coral, there's a few fish, but it's primarily around the clams. And so that's a very accessible way to see those incredible... I don't think they're animals. I don't know what they are. There's some sort of sea life. Turtles?
I think they are animals. I think they're an animalia.
Ah, okay, interesting. So... they're quite fascinating to see, and they're very colourful, very bright colours.
Yeah, I saw that. I was surprised. I didn't know that clams came in colours like cobalt blue.
Yeah, they're very surreal things to see, and so it's quite a good attraction. It's something you may not see in many other places. I did see a few in Timor-Leste, but I haven't seen anywhere else on my travels. It is also a good place to see turtles, and I would say that Samoa in general is a pretty good place to see turtles. Like, I saw turtles on 3 different places, and there are at least a couple more places we visited where if the weather had been better, there probably would have been turtles there as well. So if you want to be swimming with turtles, this is a good place to do so.
Okay.
Heading a little bit further round to Via Villas, that is at the mouth of a kind of river that leads out into a lagoon, which goes out to the sea. And through Outdoor Samoa, which is a company I rented the bikes from, they also run a one-day turtle kayak experience. So you kayak through mangroves, which is quite atmospheric, and you go out into a lagoon, and then they'll often see turtles in the water there. Now, you're not in the water, you're in the kayak, so you're looking down on the turtles, and it's amazing how fast a turtle can move when it gets startled. You see this sort of shadow under the water, and it accelerates away, but it's quite phenomenal to see. Those are some of the largest sized turtles, and so that's a really good kind of half-day kind of trip. You go out in the morning on the kayaks, you go through the lagoon and through the mangroves, and then you come back and have a delicious lunch, and then you're free for the rest of the day.
Got it.
The next spot is Olipupupio National Park, which I may or may not have pronounced correctly. And that is pretty much directly south from Apia. So Apia's in the middle of Upolu Island on the northern shore. And on the south coast is this national park. And there is actually a road that crosses the island, which I'll talk a bit about later. And so it's probably about an hour's drive from Apia directly south. This is one of my favorite places in Samoa. There's 3 things you can see and do there, and they're all free. The first thing is going out to the ma tree, which is one of these trees with these kind of crazy roots that come out in a kind of wave fashion. It's only about a 700-meter walk, but it's quite an atmospheric rainforest walk. The better walk, although slightly harder, is the lava field coastal walk. This takes about an hour return, and you go along the south coast, and there are really impressive waves crashing against the rock surface. As the name suggests, there's a lot of lava fields. So there was a lot of Samoa is volcanic in origin. And so you'll see a lot of the coast can be quite a volcanic rock, and it's very hard. There's quite a few sea caves and arches and this incredible fauna on the land side. So it's a really visually impressive walk. When I did it on a Saturday and there was nobody else there, had the whole place to ourselves. It was an amazing experience. I really recommend that as a walk. And then after that, you can go to the Tokigoga waterfalls.
Okay.
May not be pronounced that way. There's quite a few places around Samoa with waterfalls where you can swim underneath the waterfalls, and this is one of the better locations. So there are changing rooms, there are facilities, it's free access, and you can just go and refresh underneath the waters of a waterfall, which is very refreshing because the climate of Samoa, as you expect, is close to the equator. It's tropical, therefore it's hot and it's humid in particular. And so going into fresh water is a really nice way to cool down. Heading a little bit further around, Tafa Beach is quite an attractive beach. So there's quite a lot of beaches all the way around Samoa. Both of the islands have got a reef or a barrier, maybe between 50 and 100 meters offshore. So you often see in the distance these breaking waves, and then it's quite settled and still between there and the land, which makes it ideal for swimming and for snorkeling. And it's a very safe place to go in the water. And this is just one of these beaches that, if you like beaches, you'll like Samoa because there are plenty of nice beaches.
It looks quite shallow going out a ways in here. Am I interpreting that correctly? I'm seeing very light blue-green water.
Correct. There is, I think, 1, maybe 2 dive companies in Samoa. You can go diving, but primarily it is about the snorkeling and the swimming because it is, as you say, quite shallow. So that's good for beginners or people less confident in the water. But you're right, it doesn't have these huge drop-offs. It is pretty shallow, most of the beaches. If you Google image Samoa, the image that will probably crop up is of the Sua Trench. And this is an incredible, it's effectively a sinkhole, but it's near the coast. And so the sinkhole is filled up with seawater, and there is a channel between the sea and this big hole in the ground. And so it is tidal. And there's quite a steep, and I found slightly scary ladder that descends into the trench. And then you can basically swim around this amazing natural feature. So that is probably one of the most popular spots in Samoa. It is quite a unique site. It is interesting visiting a site versus seeing the photographs, because when you look at the photographs, it looks like it's in the middle of the rainforest or something.
Right.
Actually, it's in the middle of a very nicely manicured lawn, which is not quite what I was expecting, but it's quite surreal. So they've got this area with, this very nicely managed kind of lawn area, and there's some decent facilities, and there's a couple of other sinkholes. Then you've got the main sinkhole, the main trench, which you can go down to, and then you can also get out to the coast as well and get nice views along the coastline. So there's quite a few different things to do there, and it is, again, quite a unique attraction.
Okay.
So heading to the southeast of Apollo, we have Lalomanu Beach, which is often regarded as one of the best beaches in the world, or at least in the Pacific. It often gets into the top 10 list. I'm not necessarily a beach person, but I can see it is a nice beach. There are lots of nice beaches around Samoa, but this is probably one of the nicer ones, and it has probably more facilities and infrastructure than some of the other beach areas. It's very good for swimming. The sea temperatures in Samoa are actually, I found, the perfect temperature for swimming. It's warm enough that you don't get cold, but it's cool enough that it's refreshing. Whereas in New Zealand, it's just too cold. And in Timor-Leste, it was like being in a warm bath. So Samoa seems to have the optimal sea temperatures, from my perspective, for swimming and for snorkeling. What I particularly like about this part of Samoa is the landscape is a bit different. So most of Samoa is coastal, and there's some volcanic areas, and there's these beautiful beaches. But this area in the southeast, there's really impressive. They're not quite cliffs, but they're very steep land, and they're just covered in greenery. Like, it's very tropical paradise, just lush greenery going all the way up the hillside. And then when you come around the eastern end of Apollo, you head up Richardson Road. And this probably climbs about 500 meters above sea level and takes you into quite a different kind of landscape. Now, I wouldn't say there were mountains, but there's definitely some impressive rainforest-clad hills, and you get some views in the distance, and there's some impressive lakes that were built for hydropower. And then when you get to Lamafa Pass, you look north towards the north coast of Apollo, and all you can see are palm trees. So there's a huge plantation that was installed by the Germans in the late 19th century to harvest copra, which is a byproduct, or it's a product from coconuts. I think it's the oil. And so that was a major, and it still is a bit of an export for Samoa. So that's quite a different landscape to other parts of the islands. And then the final attraction coming through to Apia is at the Pula Cave Pool. So this is a freshwater pool, but it's by the sea, and there's a lot more of these on Savai'i, which I will mention, which is the other island. The temperature is probably about 10 degrees cooler than it is in the sea, and there's this very refreshing freshwater pools, which I believe would be either collected through rainwater or spring water to fill them up, and it's got quite good facilities around it. So that's a very nice, refreshing place to relax.
Okay.
So that's taken us anti-clockwise around Apollo. As I say, you could probably spend 1 to 3 days doing that itinerary, depending on which activities you want to do. Obviously, when I explored Samoa, I did it on a bicycle. So my average distance covered per day was somewhat limited by my legs. And so most people traveling around Samoa, I saw 2 other cyclists. So it's not a common activity. It's definitely possible, and it is a quite unique way of exploring the island. And there's only really one company that does it, which is called Outdoor Samoa. And they were very good. They provided lots of good support and support vehicle and lots of good information. But for most visitors, you're going to have a car. You're probably going to rent a car, and so you'll be able to get around to all these sites quite easily. To drive all the way around Apollo will probably take you about 4 hours, and to drive all the way around Savai'i will take you about 5 hours. So that gives you a bit of an idea of the scale of these islands. And the top speed is about 55 kilometers an hour or 30 miles per hour. So there's no motorways. It's quite a low speed environment. So that gives you an idea of scale. So coming through to Apia. So this is the capital city, and it is the only thing that you could possibly call a city. It's more of a large town. Everything else in Samoa are villages. There's about 300 odd villages, but Apia is the hub. So it's home to about 40,000 people. So that's about 20% of the population. A lot of visitors to Samoa will go to the airport and then to a resort. And I think they are missing out. I wouldn't necessarily say that Apia is the most fascinating city in the world, but it's certainly worth, I think, at least a day or 2 of your time to explore both downtown and also the road that goes from Apia across the island to the south coast, to that national park I talked about. That also has a lot of sites of interest. So in Apia itself, along with the trench, the other image that will probably come up, particularly if you search for Apia Samoa on Google Images, is the Immaculate Conception Cathedral. So this is a huge and colourful blue and white Catholic cathedral. It opened in 2014. Previously, there was one there for 143 years, which was a slightly different design, and it had been damaged by a large earthquake in 2009. So they rebuilt it, and it's a very beautiful church, both on the outside and on the inside.
Introducing the new Volvo XC90 with 7-seat versatility, Google built-in, and advanced safety features for all your precious cargo. The new Volvo XC90, designed for life. Visit volvocars.com/US to learn more.
This episode is brought to you by State Farm. Knowing you could be saving money for the things you really want, like that dream house or ride, is a great feeling. That's why the State Farm Personal Price Plan can help you save when you choose to bundle home and auto. Bundling, just another way to save with the Personal Price Plan. Prices are based on rating plans that vary by state. Coverage options are selected by the customer. Availability, amount of discounts and savings, and eligibility vary by state.
Opposite the cathedral is the Visitor Information Centre, which has quite good information for tourists. And behind that, there's a beautiful Friendship Park, which there's a seawall that goes around sort of downtown Apia. And that's a good place if you want to go for a run in the morning or the end of the day, or just a nice stroll by the water. Anybody visiting Apia will see the clock tower. This was built in the 1920s as a memorial to Samoan soldiers who died during World War I, and now primarily functions as the busiest roundabout in Samoa. So trying to get to the clock tower to have a read of the inscription on the plaque, you have to cross 2 lanes of traffic to get there. This is Samoa. So there's not that much traffic. It's not going that fast, but there's definitely a little bit of frogger involved to get closer to the clock tower. Now, close to the clock tower are the fish markets, which are, if you like markets, like it's a really interesting place to go. And conveniently, in the center of the fish market, there's a very large poster board which has the minimum sizes that various fish and crustaceans and crabs and lobsters can be sold at, to make sure that what they're selling is legal and not undersized. But that's also useful because it tells you what they are. So there's all these amazing, colourful fishes and these crustaceans, and I've got no idea what they are, but there's a handy poster in the middle of the fish market that helps explain that. There's another market that happens on a Saturday in the Friendship Park, which is called the Samoa Women's Association of Growers, and that has lots of locally grown produce. And then the market is the main market in Apia for fresh produce and clothes. And it's not necessarily the best market I've ever been to, but it's certainly an interesting market to get an idea about how locals live. And if you want to buy some lavas, which are sarongs effectively, that's a really good place to pick those up. Now, one of my favourite things I saw in Apia, which not everybody gets to see, is the Royal Samoan Police Marching Band. So every weekday morning at about 8:45 a.m., the Samoan police, they march from their headquarters down to the government offices, and they raise the Samoan flag, and then they march back. There is no military in Samoa, so the police are the only armed people within Samoa. And so you have the marching band with the drums and the brass instruments, and it's just a great thing to watch them. They go along, this is the main street in Apia, and they basically close the traffic on one side of the road, and they march down, they play great songs, and then they get to the end, and then they've got the other half of the police are armed, and they've got, I don't know if they're the actual guns they use these days or whether they're ceremonial, because they've got bayonets on the end of the guns. So they look more kind of World War II vintage than your latest hardware. And then they present arms, and then the flag goes up, and then they kind of salute, and then they kind of head back. So that's quite a unique thing to see if you're in Apia during a weekday.
Now, one question that raises for me is Samoa, you said, became independent in the 1960s.
1962.
And this is the Royal Samoan Police Band. Do they
well
have
spotted? So
royals?
Samoa, yeah. So Samoa was ruled by New Zealand for 50 odd years,
right?
And obviously, the head of state in New Zealand is King Charles III,
right?
So they have their own head of state now. They have a president or head of state, but they are a member of the Commonwealth.
They are a member of the Commonwealth. Okay,
they are a member of the Commonwealth. And actually, in I think October 2024, there's an event called Chogum, which is basically all the Commonwealth countries in the world, which is probably over 100, they all send representatives and they have this conference and they pick a different place in the Commonwealth each time. And so last year they went to Samoa. Now, this was the biggest thing that has probably ever happened in Samoa, because you've got delegates from hundreds of countries visiting this very small island in the Pacific, including King Charles III. So he went and he got made an honorary high chief of some of the villages. And so a lot of the tourist sites and a lot of the country was, I wouldn't say gentrified, but they obviously wanted to put on the best show for the king visiting.
Sure.
So every village in Samoa adopted a Commonwealth country. A lot of the stuff has gone, but a lot of it still remains. So when I was driving from the airport to Apia, we go into this village and it has a big sign saying, "Welcome Gambia." And then all the roadside stones and things are all painted in the colours of the Gambian flag. And then the next village was all painted in the colours of the South African flag. And then you go through the American village. And then when I was in downtown Apia, there's all these old petrol drums with New Zealand kiwis and silver ferns on, and New Zealand flags. And yeah, every village in Samoa adopted a Commonwealth country. And there's still quite a lot of that left to visit. So that was quite fascinating. Every time we went to visit a village, it was, okay, which country is this village adopted?
Huh. Interesting.
So a couple of other things in sort of downtown Apia. There is some snorkeling at the Palolo Deep Marine Reserve. I didn't get a chance to go there, but the photos look quite reasonable. And there's a peninsula that is to the west of town, which is home to the Parliament House, the Law and Titles Court. There's an historic observatory and there's many important tombs. There's nothing like major sights to see, but it's quite a pleasant place to walk around the seawall and look at those kind of sites. There is a museum of Samoa, but the building is much more impressive than the contents. So I wouldn't put it necessarily very high up on your visit list. Most of the building seems to be taken up with offices for a government department rather than exhibits.
Okay.
Now, my favorite part of Apia is heading from Apia up the hillsides. Apia is on the coast, and then there's this road called the Cross Island Road, which to its name, it crosses the island and goes down to the south coast. Now, I thought most of my favorite sites in Apia, apart from obviously the marching band, were on this road. So the first site is the Robert Louis Stevenson Museum. So Robert Louis Stevenson, he's author of Treasure Island and Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. And he spent the last 4 years of his life in Samoa. And he built the largest private house in Samoa, and it may still be the largest private house in Samoa. It's quite large and is a beautiful building. And after he died, it was actually used by the German and New Zealand governors as their home. And then the Samoan head of state used to live there. So it's quite an impressive building. Large verandas, very airy structure. It was badly damaged by cyclones in 1990 and 1991. And the Samoan government didn't have the funds to restore the building, so they're looking for people to help. And there was an American businessman, a successful American businessman, who was a Mormon, and there is a lot of Mormons in Samoa. And he was a missionary in Samoa 40 years earlier. And he saw that this building was going to have to be destroyed if they couldn't fix it up. And he put a lot of his own money into restoring the building. And now it's managed by a trust. And it's been turned into a museum about Robert Louis Stevenson. So that is probably one of the most interesting historic sites in Samoa. And you get a guided tour. It takes about half an hour to look around the house. Near the house, there's also Valimina Botanic Gardens, which are not huge, but they're quite attractive. The best thing about them is there is a small waterfall with a swimming hole, which is generally in the wet season, which is, I guess, November through to April is the wet season. That's when it's most in use. In the dry season, apparently it could dry out. But when I visited in May, there was still enough water in there to go for a refreshing dip. And the reason you really want to have a refreshing dip is the Botanic Gardens are at the base of Mount Vaya. Mount Vaya is the most prominent hill behind Apia, and at the summit, the 492-metre summit, is Robert Louis Stevenson's tomb. And it's one of the most popular places for both tourists and, I guess, and for locals to get some exercise. And so any time of day you go there, there will be people heading up to the summit. It takes probably 45 minutes to an hour, depending on how fit you are and acclimatized to the heat and humidity. There's two ways to get there. There's a steeper way with stairs, and there's a less steep way with lots of tree roots. And it's just a really nice kind of loop and walk. You don't get very good views from the top, unfortunately. It's mostly surrounded by rainforest and bush, but it's just a nice kind of walk to do. And then you can go for a bit of a swim when you're finished. Heading further up the road, there is the Shrine of the Three Hearts. Now, this is a huge Catholic church opened in 2010. It's got probably the best stained glass I saw anywhere in Samoa. And it's one of the few places you can really get a good panoramic view of Apia. For somewhere with a big hill behind it, it's surprisingly hard to get good views of Apia. But that church, very nice views and a nice church to visit. Heading further up the hill, so this is still only maybe 20 to 30 minutes drive from downtown Apia, you get to the Baha'i House of Worship. So there's only 8 of these buildings in the world. There's a beautiful one in Chicago, and this is the one representing the Pacific. So it opened in 1984. They've got these distinctive kind of 9-sided buildings, and Baha'i houses of worship always have the most beautiful gardens surrounding them. Amazing gardens. It's free to visit. It's very worthwhile. I don't know, Chris, have you visited any of the houses of worship?
I have seen the gardens in, I want to say, Haifa in Israel.
Correct. That is not a house of worship, but that is where the founder of the religion is buried. So that's actually his tomb. But you're right, those gardens, these sort of hanging gardens that go down the hillside are absolutely spectacular. So the one in Chicago, if you ever go to Chicago, it's up just north, maybe 45 minutes north of Chicago. Beautiful. So just next to the Baha'i House of Worship is the Tia Papataya Art Center, which has been going for about 35 years now. And you wouldn't believe you're in Samoa. It's definitely where the expats hang out. It's got a nice cafe. It's got an artist studio. It's got 3 Airbnb units, but it's a bit cooler up in the hills there. And it's a great place to go for lunch. It's close to Mount Fiamoa, which is a near 1,000-meter high volcanic peak, and that's quite easy to get to. You can drive most of the way, and then the road gets pretty rough, so you just have to walk the last little section. On a clear day, you could pretty much see the whole island. On the day that I went, I could barely see my hand. It's amazing because I'm walking around in the mist, and then I get back in the car and I drive down to Apia, and it was in the mist. It was like 20 degrees, zero visibility, raining hard. Within 5 minutes, the rain stops. Within 10 minutes, the clouds disappear. And then when you get down to town 20 minutes later, it's 32 degrees and it's tropical and it's blue skies and sunny. So there's quite a temperature weather difference as going up into the hills behind Apia.
And you just answered the question I was about to ask, which is, you didn't do this all on bicycle, did you? No, this part you were doing on car.
Correct. I did. Yes, you're right. Yeah. There is a couple more sites up on this road to talk about. There is Lake Lanatoto National Park, or often called the Goldfish Lake. Now, this is a volcanic crater, which is now the largest lake in Samoa. And some locals have let loose their pet goldfish in the lake. So there are some quite large goldfish quite happily living up in this lake. It is about a 7.5K return hike, probably 2 to 3 hours. It was extremely muddy and slippery and overgrown. It's very much an adventure hike. I feel that if I was to do it again, I should take my own machete, but it was a bit of an experience to do. So that's something for the more adventurous minded. And then the last site is the Papapapaitai Falls, which is, I think you can get down to the falls, but it's a bit tricky. It's easy just to see them from the lookout by the side of the road. And these are 100-meter high waterfalls, which are the highest in the country. So that's given you a pretty good idea about what you can do on Upolu, going around anti-clockwise and then heading up through the middle of the island. So next I'll talk a little bit about Savaii. Savaii is the largest of the islands in Samoa. And this, I will do an itinerary starting from where the ferry arrives, because there's a ferry between the two islands. It takes about an hour to an hour and a quarter to cross. You can take your car on the ferry. I took the ferry twice. The first time was fine. The second time was quite rough. So you may want to try and get the morning ferries, because often it can be a bit calmer first thing in the morning. Mm-hmm. And if you do suffer from seasickness, take some seasickness pills, because it was a bit choppy. So from Savaii, Again, heading in anti-clockwise direction, there are lots of impressive churches close to the ferry wharf. And then there's the John Williams Memorial Pool. So John Williams is one of the early missionaries to Samoa in the probably mid-19th century. And there's a number of sites around the country that commemorate him. There's a big monument in downtown Apia. And John Williams Memorial Pool is just another freshwater pool, but they're very relaxing. They're quite surreal because you're sitting in fresh water and there are fish trying to nibble on your toes, and there's a small wall, and then there's the sea. And then opposite the memorial pool is one of the probably the most beautiful churches in Samoa. So it's just an interesting kind of contrast. It's free entry. It's a really good way of cooling down. Head around to Lano Beach, which is a beautiful beach. Going on a little bit further from there, there's the Asaga River Pool. And this is where a river flows into the sea and there's lots of mangroves. And if you get your timings right and you go when the tide is coming out, you can basically float in the pool, or you can float in the river, and you can drift down from the river through the mangroves out to the coast. So that's quite a nice thing to do. And all the way around the north coast of Savai'i, there was lots and lots of freshwater pools. So there's always an opportunity to cool down if you overheat. There's an unusual village called Manga, which is an entirely circular village because it's built around a volcanic crater. So all the houses are around the edge of the crater, and then at the bottom of the crater is the cricket pitch. And what I discovered, cricket is quite popular in Samoa, probably the New Zealand influence, but volcanic soil is not very conducive to bowling because you can imagine it's quite lumpy and uneven surface and rocky and quite hard. So I saw these in a number of different places. What Samoans do is they basically lay down a concrete strip, which is the length of the cricket bowling area where the people have each side, and they bowl on the concrete, but the rest of the pitch effectively is just whatever there is around. So in this case, it's all volcanic rock. Another case, we cycled through a village and the cricket bowling bit was, 3 meters away from the main road, the only road. And so the road was part of the pitch. So we're like, okay, we better stop and not to obviously avoid getting hit by a stray cricket ball. And we didn't want to kind of cycle straight through their match. They do enjoy the cricket and they have found a way to be able to play it on quite uneven surfaces. Heading up to the northern part of Savai'i, you've got the Saliulia lava fields. So at the beginning of the 20th century, Mount Matavana erupted, and it took a number of years. So over kind of a 6-year period, it had various eruptions. And because it was up higher, the lava basically flowed down the coast. It wiped out several villages, and then it basically flowed down to the coast where it then got cooled down by the sea and finished. But in its way was the London Missionary Society Church. So now you've got all the walls are remaining, the roof is gone, but you've got the remaining walls of this church, and the church is filled with volcanic lava flow rock, which if you look at it, it looks like it should be liquid because it's all ripply, but obviously it's hard and solid like a rock. So there's not many places I've been to where you've got volcanic lava flows through a church. And nearby there's a site called the Virgin's Grave, which was a young lady who died, and somehow her grave was missed by the lava. There's lava everywhere, and the lava just flowed, and as soon as it gets to the grave, it just parts, and the lava flowed around the grave and then joined on the other side. So that's quite a kind of unusual sight. Regina Beach is another nice beach at the northern end of Savai'i, and that's a good opportunity to go snorkeling with turtles. Unfortunately, the weather was a bit patchy when we were there, so we saw the turtles from the shore, but when we went into snorkel, we didn't get to see them, but that's quite a nice place to stay. A little bit further on was a German colonial graveyard, which was surprisingly full. There was probably 30 or 40 graves, given the Germans were only in Samoa for 15, 20 years, and this seemed like quite a remote place. But there was this kind of atmospheric, overgrown graveyard that was worth a visit. And then heading further along, there's the Pi'apea Cave, which is one of a number of lava caves. So there's the Dwarf's Cave, and there's probably 3 or 4 tourist site caves, which are old lava tubes. So these are where there's basically like an air pocket within the lava flows, and you can go down into this cave. And the swifts, the birds, swifts, they live in the cave, and they navigate through echolocation like a bat. So when you go into the cave, they're flying in and out of the cave right by your head, and you can hear them like their sonar. You can hear them making noises that bounce against the wall, so they know where they are. So that's interesting to see.
And you said lava cave was like an air pocket. It's a little different than that. It's basically if you picture the lava flowing down from the volcano, it has a channel. And as you can imagine, the top of that lava is going to cool faster than the bottom of the lava because it's exposed to the air. And so eventually that channel may crust over, in which case it will flow in this tube. And then eventually, as the lava stops, the tube will empty and you'll leave this tunnel.
That is a much better description, Chris. Have you seen other ones presumably in Hawaii?
Yes, exactly.
And I have been to one in Auckland in New Zealand underneath somebody's house. So you go into their backyard and you go down some steps and then you're in this lava cave underneath their house.
Huh.
So further around from the cave, there's the Cyclone Church, and this is another abandoned church. So the walls are still standing, the roof is gone. But rather than lava, this one was destroyed. There was a big cyclone in 1990, and there was another cyclone in 1991. And so they pretty much wrecked the church. They built a new church the other side of the road. Again, it's just quite an atmospheric sight to see. Probably my favourite beach in Samoa is Whalelupe Beach, which is at the very western tip of Savai'i. Very quiet. This is a little bit of a detour off the main circular road, and it's a beautiful sandy beach, palm trees, good sunsets because you're at the western end, and there's very good snorkeling there as well. And we were the only people staying there, and it was just very relaxing, very quiet, and it's a beautiful place. And then coming a bit further down on the west coast, you've got Satiuatua Beach, which it's another nice beach, and it has drift snorkeling. So there's always a bit of a current. So that makes it, which is like lazy snorkeling. You just get in at one end of the beach. You don't have to do a thing. You just float over the top of the coral and see all the fish, and you get out at the other end and walk back. So it's, quite a good experience.
I just MailChimped my marketing.
You MailChimped your what?
I MailChimped my marketing with AI to create an effective marketing campaign in minutes.
No, MailChimp and Way.
Yes, MailChimp and Way. Now I can hyper-personalize my campaigns across email and SMS.
You can do all that with MailChimp.
What did I just MailChimp and say?
MailChimp your marketing with the #1 AI-powered email marketing and automation platform, Intuit MailChimp. #1 based on publicly available data on competitors' customers. Plans vary. SMS available as add-ons. Visit MailChimp.com.
This episode is brought to you by Indeed. When your computer breaks, you don't wait for it to magically start working again. You fix the problem. So why wait to hire the people your company desperately needs? Use Indeed's sponsored jobs to hire top talent fast. And even better, you only pay for results. There's no need to wait. Speed up your hiring with a $75 sponsored job credit at Indeed.com/podcast. Terms and conditions apply.
One thing you didn't mention is when I'm looking at some of these pictures of these beaches, so for instance, the Whalelupo beach, that I'm seeing structures here. So it looks like I'm renting not just a chaise lounge and an umbrella, but I'm actually renting like a hut.
Correct. I was going to talk about some accommodation, but this is a good point to talk about Fales, which is where the name for that place, Whalelupe, comes from.
Okay.
And Fale basically means kind of structure or house. So there's a lot of villages with Fale in the name. So Fales are very much a Samoan thing. I don't believe American Samoa really has them, interestingly, but certainly on Samoa, Fales are very simple wooden structures, typically by a beach, and they're oval shaped, and they're raised off the ground by half a meter, depending on the location. And they have a roof, and they're open. They often will have blinds that you can pull down on the various sides, and they're places you stay. So you basically stay, your accommodation for the night is a fale, and you sleep on a mattress underneath a mosquito net in this kind of hut that has no walls, but obviously you can put the blinds down. So they're very basic structures. I loved them. I stayed, I think, in 8 or 9 during my time in Samoa. They're all quite consistent in terms of what you get. Generally, they'll be run by the local community, and often they'll give you breakfast. And if you ask nicely, they can give you dinner and perhaps lunch as well, which is a great way of eating local food, because although there's a number of resorts around Samoa, they tend to cater more to the kind of Western palette of a chicken and chips or fish and chips or those kind of meals. Whereas if you're staying at the Fales, you're staying, this is how the Samoans stay. And so you're eating generally local Samoan food, and you're staying in these valet structures. Now, most of them are basic stays. So there's no air conditioning.
Yep.
There's no fan. They have shared facilities in terms of toilets and showers,
Right.
which it seems to be quite either out of choice or deliberate. I didn't come across many shower heads in Samoa. All the valets, basically the shower is a pipe. So you turn it on and you get a full-on pipe, which I quite like. It's quite full-on as a showering experience. But apparently it is a bit of a discussion amongst some of the people in the tourism industry about the lack of shower heads in some places. I think some people really like a shower head. But for me, I'm fine with just water coming out of a tap above my head, basically. So they're not for everybody. Definitely not for everybody, but they are a quite unique accommodation option, and it's something that's very Samoan. And I'd recommend visit one, try one, and you get a bit of a feel for it, and you can see whether you like it or not.
Okay.
You're staying on the beach, so generally there is a bit of a breeze, but it can still be quite hot. And actually, the biggest thing I found was the humidity, because it's a humid place. You're by the sea, everything's just a bit sticky, and you get sand. And so, for people with OCD, they would probably struggle a little bit because it's hard to stay clean. But the views are amazing. Like, you're literally sleeping by the beach. And I'd say I think I stayed in 8 or 9, and only one of them we had any other guests staying at the same place. We basically had the place to ourselves. So that was an amazing experience to have. But try it. It may not be for you. Maybe just book the one night and then stay in the resort if you're unsure. If you're used to camping, it's like camping, basically. So if you're happy camping, you'll be happy in the valet. But if you're not a camper, then you might want to stay in the resorts.
Cool. Thanks.
So finishing off Savai'i on the south coast, there's the Tugga blowholes. Now, these are apparently some of the biggest blowholes in the world, or most powerful blowholes. So the whole coast along the south coast is volcanic, and there are some large holes based on the lava flow or where things have eroded away. And so even on a relatively calm day, when the sea comes in, it gets compacted and it just squirts out of these holes in the coast, probably 20, 30, 40 meters high. You don't get too close. The locals get very close, and it's scary, but they're really interesting to see from a distance. And it's just phenomenal to see the power of nature at these natural blowholes. And then there's the Afu'au waterfall, which is one of the best waterfalls that you can swim underneath, and there's changing facilities, and it's a relaxing place to stay. And then a bit further around is Agnoa Beach, which is probably I found the best place for snorkeling in terms of the things I saw. So it had the nicest reef. It had a drop-off, unusually from the back of the reef to the depths. We saw some beautiful turtles, but the currents were quite strong there. It's better known as a surfing destination. And I'm not a surfer, but what Google tells me is that Samoa has some of the largest surf breaks in the world. So it's not necessarily for beginners, but for experienced surfers, Samoa is a destination.
Okay.
So that's covered the 2 main islands. It's also worth mentioning Mana'ono Island. So this is between Upolu and Savai'i. It's a maybe 15-minute boat journey from the western end of Upolu. And it's just a very quiet, very relaxing, quite idyllic small island. It's only home to about 800 people. There are no dogs, which is quite unusual in Samoa because every house has at least one dog. And so there are no dogs, there are no cars. There's just a little coastal path that takes a couple of hours to walk around. There's 1 or 2 places you can swim and snorkel. And it's just a very relaxed place to stay. So Mana'ono Island is a good, if you've got an extra day, it's a good day trip out, or there is accommodation, you can stay on the island. Now, in terms of some of the logistics around Samoa, as I mentioned, getting around, you can cycle around. It's not for everybody, but it was definitely an experience. Most people will rent a car. They drive on the left-hand side of the road, and it's relatively easy driving. Like the roads, the main road around the island is sealed. The traffic speeds are pretty low. There's not a huge amount of traffic. And as I said, there's a ferry between 2 islands. So that's how most people do it, is rent a car. In terms of accommodation, so we talked about valets, which I love, but there are also a number of beachside resorts around the country to varying degrees of quality. Most are 3-4 star resorts. They're not, to my taste, I stayed in a couple of them. They're very pleasant. They've got all the things you'd expect from a resort if you want to do that. And then in Apia, there are a number of Airbnb options as well.
Okay.
In terms of food, so the traditional Samoan meal is called an umu, and that is a lot of coconut and taro based dishes and fish and chicken, but often with coconut sauces or cooked in a coconut or various different ways of using a coconut. And that's what they do on a Sunday is they prepare this umu feast, and it's cooked over hot coals. So they will heat up the rocks, then they'll put the food on top, and then they'll cover it up with palm leaves, leave it to cook for a bit, and then serve that for lunch. You won't necessarily see it in the resort, or if you do, it might be a demonstration kind of thing. But I had, at some of the fallets I stayed at, they did an umu. And that says what people do on a Sunday. So if you're traveling around Samoa, bear in mind that on a Sunday, nothing happens. Sunday is the day of rest, and most places are closed. In the morning, Samoans will get up, start preparing the umu. Then they will go to church. So mid to late morning, anywhere around Samoa, you can hear people singing hymns in the churches. And then they have this delicious feast, and then they sleep. And so Sunday afternoon is nap time, and that's what happens on a Sunday. You do need to bear that in mind if you're looking to visit places. Some sites are open. A number of sites won't be open until the afternoon. So that's just, something to bear in mind if you're traveling around the Sunday. Serving sizes in Samoa are a pretty decent size, but one thing to bear in mind is outside of the main towns on Upolu and Savaii, it's basically no restaurants. The only places you're going to get any food is at your accommodation or if you stop into a resort to eat. So you do need to think about that in terms of logistics. There are convenience stores around and you might be able to get a pie or something fried. But if you're looking for anything that resembles a normal meal, you need to go to a resort to organize food with your accommodation. In terms of getting to Samoa, there are direct flights from Auckland, Brisbane, Hawaii, American Samoa, and Fiji.
Okay.
None of those are really the biggest hubs in the world, but certainly a lot of people will visit Samoa. If they're going to Australia or New Zealand, they might add on a trip to Samoa. Or if you're in Hawaii, that's another way of getting there relatively easily. It's a very safe place. Pretty much everybody speaks English to varying degrees. So they all speak Samoan, but English is also one of the main languages. And if you're anywhere touristy, they will be speaking English. And one thing to note about Samoa is all the land belongs to somebody, and it belongs to the communities effectively.
Okay.
So Samoa is divided up into 300 odd villages, and those villages are made up of the families within those villages that can be quite large. And every piece of land in all the islands has an owner. And so to access that land, you will often need to pay a little bit of money. Now we're talking about 5 to 10 Samoan tala, which in American dollars is probably $2 to $4 US. So it's not a large amount of money, but some of the sites, there is a sign up saying this is how much it costs for entry. There's normally a cost per person. And if you have a vehicle, you often have to pay for the vehicle. And if it's a large vehicle, you might have to pay a higher fee. But it is something to bear in mind that every beach in Samoa is owned by the community. So you will be expected to have to pay if you're going to go to the beach, which might be unusual for some people. The national parks are free entry, and there are a number of other free sites. But in general, expect to pay 5 or 10 tala for whatever you're doing per person. If they're trying to charge you more than that's probably not the actual price. So just bear that in mind. Okay. There's almost no Wi-Fi in the country other than the high-end resorts. So you typically will get mobile data, and there's Digicel and Vodafone are the two providers. You can obviously get an eSIM or you can get a SIM card when you get into country. You're probably looking at about $40 US for 50 gigabytes of data to last a month. So it's not particularly cheap, but it's definitely doable, and the speeds vary depending on where you are within the country. One thing to note is outside of probably the resorts, credit cards will not be accepted. This is very much a cash culture. Okay. So recommend bringing US dollars to Samoa and then changing it at the airport or in town. In terms of when to visit, so the wet season, is November, December through to April, and the dry season is May to November. There is no such thing really as an absolute dry season. Like it will still lightly rain, but it's a tropical climate. It will rain in the afternoon for an hour or so, and that's what happens. I would avoid the July school holidays. So it's a particularly popular destination for Kiwis and Australians, and that's the particularly popular time of year for them to visit. It's quite unusual visiting as a Kiwi because it's probably one of the very few countries in the world where the largest number of tourists come from New Zealand. Normally you go somewhere and you might see the odd Kiwi. When you go to Samoa, most of the tourists are going to be Kiwi or Australian, and I think a distant third American visitors.
Interesting. Not all Kiwis are odd, just to be fair.
Quite a few of them are, but you're right, not all of them are. Just a final couple of things. So it is a very clean place. It was a lot cleaner than I was expecting. The communities and the villages take a lot of pride in making sure that, particularly along by the main road where you're traveling, you don't see big piles of rubbish. Like compared to my experience in Timor-Leste, is very looked after. I think because you've got these villages which are run basically by the families, there's quite a lot of peer pressure, and there's this system called the Matai system. And the Matai system is basically you've got a high chief and you've got a bit of a hierarchy for decision making within the communities. And then they have the women's committee and the men's committee, and they will inspect people's properties. So once a month, the women's committee will go out and make sure that you haven't left, your grass isn't too long, and that things are clean and tidy. I have to say, I've never seen a country with so many flymos. Would you call them flymos in America?
I don't know what flymo would be.
Okay, for cutting grass with the bit of plastic on the end that whizzes around.
A weed whacker.
A weed whacker. Okay. Or a strimmer or a flymo. So there you've got the American and the English and the New Zealand, Australian words for that device. So for cutting the grass. So generally the lawns in Samoa are very manicured and well looked after because everyone's out there strimming away. I mentioned earlier they drive on the left-hand side of the road. They were the last country in the world, I believe, to switch. So in 2009, they changed from the right-hand side of the road to the left-hand side of the road because most of the visitors are from Australia and New Zealand. We drive on the left-hand side of the road. So they did the switch around. And then in 2011, they changed their time zone. So originally, they were Greenwich Mean Time minus 11 hours. So they were the last country, or one of the last countries in the world, if you want to view it that way, in terms of seeing the rising sun. Now they're GMT plus 13. So they're one of the first countries in the world. And again, they did that to align with New Zealand and Australia. So they're only 2 hours time difference away from New Zealand.
The odd thing is they didn't change their clocks. They changed their calendar.
So they lost a day.
It's the same time, but a different day. That's fascinating.
Because I say they wanted, which makes sense from a business perspective because it's your Monday, it's their Sunday. So if you release it on the same day, that makes things a bit easier to manage.
Interesting.
And if you're looking for any more information on Samoa, I would actually recommend, even though I have a blog, my blog posts on Samoa won't be out for some time. There's a website called Samoa Pocket Guide, and the authors are a Kiwi couple, and they've done a phenomenal job at explaining everything you want to know about Samoa. So that's a really good resource to use.
I would just say, I know you haven't gotten to your Samoa article yet, or articles, because you're, as you said, about a year behind. Sometimes in blogging world, we don't write things in the chronological order that we did, and sometimes we also just give up on that old blog post that we didn't write a year ago.
I've written them. They are written. They're all ready to publish.
Gosh.
Like, they're all scheduled. The problem is I spent a year in Timor-Leste and I generated like more than a year's worth of content. and I only want to publish 3 times a fortnight so I don't overwhelm people. So this is on the jontytravels.com website. So if you visit in 2025, you'll see a lot of posts on my website, jontytravels.com, about Timor-Leste. If you visit in 2026 in the second half, there'll be lots of posts about Samoa.
Wow. Okay. That is incredibly organized. I have a copy of your notes because you are that organized here. So I know that you've come to the end of the things you wanted to talk about. Anything else, though, you want to fit in before we get to our wrap-up questions?
No, I think that's fairly comprehensive.
Excellent. You know the wrap-up questions? You're standing in the prettiest spot in all of Samoa. Where are you standing and what are you looking at?
Falalupe Beach, which is on the western end, because it had probably the best sunsets of anywhere I saw in Samoa. There was good snorkeling. It's a beautiful sandy beach. We had the place to ourselves. It was just a beautiful place to stay.
Excellent. And one thing that makes you laugh and say, only in Samoa.
Oh, I've got a few of them. So there are fallets everywhere. And what I didn't mention is every house has a meeting house. So you have your house with walls and a roof and a structure. And in front of your house, you will have an open structure, which looks a bit like a fallet, but it's not raised off the ground generally. But again, it's an open structure with a roof, often can be oval in design. And that is where you and your family and other people in the community will meet and they will hang out. And because it's hot climate, you just want to be out in the open air. So these meeting houses, pretty much every single house in the entire country has a meeting house. So when you're traveling around Samoa, you will just see all these meeting houses, which are quite interesting to see.
So it's like a front porch, except that it's unattached. I think of places
and it's
like
the
the
size,
US and the
if
South.
not well, except it's as big, if not bigger, than your actual house.
Wow. Okay. Huh.
So they're quite impressive structures with quite decent roofs, and they're pretty large. I think they're generally large enough that you could get most of the community in your meeting house if you wanted to. And say pretty much every single house and every church will also have like a meeting house outside. And they tend to be the ones closest to the road. So actually, when you're traveling along, you'll generally see all the meeting houses on either side. And behind that are where people's houses are.
Huh. Okay.
And then the other unexpected thing in Samoa was, despite the fact most people speak English there, all the children seem to think that the word bye means hello. So you're going along and they're waving at you and they've got a big smile on their face and they're going bye, bye, as if you'd say hello, but they're saying bye. And I'm like, no, hello, hello. And it happened throughout both islands. Hundreds of kids all seem to think that the word bye means hello, which was quite confusing.
That's funny. And if you had to summarize Samoa in just 3 words, what 3 words would you use?
Tropical, beautiful, and relaxed.
Excellent. Our guest again has been Jonty Crane from JontyTravels.com, where apparently sometime in 2026 you can read more about Samoa. Jonty, thanks so much for coming on Amateur Traveler and sharing with us your obvious love for Samoa.
Thank you so much, Chris.
Savor every last drop of summer with Starbucks. From bold refreshers to rich cold brews, the sunniest season only gets better with a handcrafted iced beverage in your hand. Available for a limited time. Your summer favorites are ready at Starbucks.
This episode is brought to you by Nespresso and Samoa Origins by the Weekend Coffee Collection.
Introducing Samoa Origins. My collaboration with Nespresso is a connection to my roots, to my mother, Samoa. Coffee that hits the right notes. It transports you. Crafted with unique notes and bold soaring flavors. Experience a taste that moves you. Nespresso and Samoa Origins.
Discover more at Nespresso.com.
Thanks to the patrons of the show who help support Amateur Traveler financially. If you're interested in learning more about becoming a patron of the show, go to patreon.com/amateurtraveler. New on the blog at Amateur Traveler since the last episode is an article on Athens is More Than the Acropolis by frequent contributor Barry Kramer. Speaking of Barry, I heard from him this week. Barry wrote and said, your podcast from the previous week regarding your rafting adventure in the Grand Canyon was among your top 10 podcasts. Your passion and excitement were evident in every detail you shared. I was so inspired by your account of the experience that I forwarded the podcast link to my daughter, encouraging her to seriously consider it as a family activity for next year. Your work is greatly appreciated, Barry. Well, thanks, Barry, and I appreciate your work on the Amateur Traveler blog. It's always cool to hear this, and especially if you actually do book a trip based on Amateur Traveler, please do let me know, because I go back to the sponsors who brought me to some place, or in this case, who took me on the Grand Canyon rafting, and I let them know that. And it's useful for me as I'm pitching for other adventures in the future. Speaking of adventures, if you want to go on an adventure with me, there is still space available in the 2026 Amateur Traveler trip to Uzbekistan and Turkmenistan. And again, we've got an upcoming episode on Turkmenistan that's going to make you want to go there. Details can be found at amateurtraveler.com/trips. With that, we're going to end this episode of Amateur Traveler. If you have any questions, send an email to chris2x@gmail.com, or better yet, leave a comment on this episode at amateurtraveler.com. And thanks so much for listening.
I got to see one more cathedral. I got to sit in